Larry, what we've learned from the Iranian foreign minister on February 7th, he was talking about a comprehensive deal with the United States, a comprehensive deal. But the core, the heart of what he was talking about was the case of Palestine. I don't think that Palestine, it's not an isolated conflict between the United States and Iran or between Iran and Israel. It's all related to what's going on in Palestine
Yeah.
and the way that Israel is trying to somehow occupy all the land, and in the West Bank they're trying to capture all the land, and in Gaza they're trying to do the same without addressing. I don't think that without considering the case of Gaza, the case of Palestine, there is no comprehensive deal between Iran and the United States, even bringing up the case of sanctions and the case of sanctions and nuclear program. What is your understanding of that?
Well, the first objective of Iran ought to be getting the sanctions lifted. Now, I think we're still in it. We're in the beginning of a new phase. That once Russia and China rejected the snapback sanctions last October, when the EU, who had never, or France, Germany, UK, who had never lifted the sanctions in the first place as they were supposed to, that Iran now has an alternative, that it doesn't have to be tied to what the West, the West does. But if Iran is going to make, well, number one, Iran agreeing to say, okay, we're not going to build a nuke. Well, they're not building a nuke, okay? So, yeah, we'll agree to do what we're not doing, okay? But in exchange for that, the West has to agree to lift the sanctions immediately, not delayed. But that's not going to happen. Look, this entire, it's a charade. About we got to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. That's not what this is about. This is a hatred of the Islamic Republic, pure and simple. And the goal of the West is the destruction of the Islamic Republic. I don't want to go off into a theological discussion here, but there's something to be said about the religious roots or the foundation of the Islamic Republic. It's antithetical to what the West is. The West, as we're seeing with these revelations out of the Epstein files, it's a demonic system. It's evil, and it's godless, and it's. I don't think it's just a coincidence that the United States in particular now, with the Western allies in Europe, are obsessed with trying to destroy countries like Russia and Iran, because both countries have a religious foundation and a belief in God, and a belief that this belief in God goes to the point that there are things that the leaders of those countries think that they shouldn't do because it's wrong. That concept of wrongness doesn't exist anymore in the West, as far as I'm concerned. We can do whatever the hell we want just because we've made ourselves God. And that dimension, that, if you will, the theological dimension of this is actually, I think, it undergirds all of this conflict that we see. It's about, we cannot abide by having countries that have a moral code, and we got to destroy them if we can.
I think, Professor Marandi, my question to you would be the case of Palestine, and how important is that for Iran and the policies, the foreign policy of Iran?
Well, Nima, I think it's pretty clear. And this sort of as an extension of what Larry has been saying. Iran's sin, Iran's guilt, Iran is horrible and evil in the Western media. the Epstein class media because of Iran's support for the Palestinian people. Support which has come at great cost to Iran and its allies. No one else pays a price. Turkey benefits from talking but cooperating with the Israeli regime. Qatar benefits from pretending to support the Palestinian cause, but working hand in glove with Americans and the West in all realms. The same is true with all these other countries. But Iran and its allies, they lose people, they're sanctioned, they're killed, they're murdered, and you have this anti-Iranian and anti-resistance media, whether it's Al Jazeera or Turkish media or Saudi media or Emirati media or Western media, all of them saying how evil Iran is, how horrible Iran is, each in their own way. Some more sophisticated, some more subtle, some more bombastic. They're different from one another. But at the end of the day, they're hostile towards Iran, whether it's Al Jazeera and The Guardian or whether it's Fox News and Breitbart. It really doesn't make a difference. But it's not just Palestine. It's also Cuba. It's also Venezuela. It's Iran believes and supports these entities that are under pressure from the empire, or Syria. For Iran, the Syrian government of former President Assad was not the question. The issue was that the United States and the Israelis, along with their regional proxies, whether Erdogan or Qatar or Abdullah in Jordan, they wanted to undermine this country for the sake of the Israeli regime, and they ultimately succeeded. Iran stood against it, as well as in Iraq, and as well as in Lebanon, because it was opposed to ISIS and Al Qaeda, and it was opposed to Western hegemony. So all of these things make Iran evil and irredeemable. And so that's why they conspired, brought in these terrorists, and then blamed Iran for the terrorists that they brought into Iran
Yeah.
and the riots for all the deaths. And then they inflate the deaths, even though they said that there's no internet, but they were going up every day, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 80,000 by the minute, both to sort of make the ongoing genocide in Gaza look less horrific through these manufactured numbers, but also to demonize Iran and to say Iran is gunning. And then when the Iranian government put out the real numbers with all the data about their background, their ID numbers, 3,117, they brought it down from 80,000 to 5,000, 6,000. They still won't go to the real number, but they had to sort of. But it's all about demonization. But the difference today is that the West no longer has that authority, whether it's the power to or whether it's the moral authority. I'm not saying it ever had moral authority, but it pretended to have moral authority. But with what we've seen with Epstein and many other things over the last few years, that has disappeared. And then alternatively, you see entities on the rise in the global south. Iran is no longer isolated the way it was 10, 15 years ago, when Russia and China were forced into accepting UN Security Council resolutions against Iran, when they were intimidated into not cooperating extensively with Iran. That is changing because the world is now increasingly angry, wary, and angry of the United States. And these rising powers, Iran, Russia, China, among others, they have a different worldview. So the West is on the decline, morally, even among their own people, economically, militarily, and countries like Iran, Russia, and China are on the rise. So I don't believe that if the United States invaded Iran after taking Iraq, back then some were saying real men go to Tehran. I don't believe the United States would have won then. I think it would have been a catastrophic failure. But I believe today it is going to end far worse for the empire than it would have back then. But as I said, people in the United States, people across the world no longer believe the propaganda. Every day we're seeing new things coming out from the files, and some of them are I can't even talk about it because may have problems with with YouTube. But some of the things that I've seen over the past few days about, well, forget it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Larry,
we're gonna get you banned.
Yeah,
Larry, let me read what Ali Larijani, the head of Iranian National Security Council, just tweeted. He says that Netanyahu is now on his way to the United States, and Americans must think wisely and not allow him through posturing to imply before his flight that I want to go and teach Americans the framework of nuclear negotiations. They must remain alert to the destructive role of the Zionists. I think, Larry, when it comes to the war with Iran, Donald Trump, after all, you've mentioned that everything is just each and
Yeah.
every sign shows us that they want to attack Iran. But so attacking, let's go with the attack. Attacking Iran. How long does the United States can continue the conflict, the war in Iran?
Yeah,
That sustaining the war is of particular importance, in my opinion.
yeah. People are not thinking rationally about this, and that's why I keep coming back to. We need to look to the past to see what are the actual capabilities of the United States militarily. I spent more than almost a quarter of a century scripting exercises for the U.S. military special operations forces. And in scripting those exercises, you create scenarios, and then my job was to generate message traffic that would force them to make decisions and have to respond. And it ain't Hollywood. You come up with reality. So we've seen, in the case of Iraq in 2003, despite the United States being able to just bomb the hell out of Iraq, and we could fly over Iraq without having to be afraid of getting shot down, it didn't force the regime of Saddam Hussein or the government of Saddam Hussein to collapse. We actually had to put troops in there. Well, those troops, we don't snap our fingers and they all of a sudden show up. This is not like Star Trek where you can beam them down, Scotty. It took 8 months to assemble 165,000 troops. And, people, I acquired a little appreciation for the size of Iraq. I was asked to go over in 2006 to train a Navy SEAL to be on television, okay? So I got deployed to Iraq in 2006 and flew into Qatar. We flew out of Al Udeid, and those were some long. I was on a C-130, and it was a long, grueling flight. Iran's 4 times the size of Iraq, for God's sake, okay? So it's a big country. And Iraq doesn't have mountains like Iran does. So the terrain alone is challenging. And so we've seen the use of U.S. military force. We had 20 years of it in Afghanistan. And, it's not like they were fighting an army that was, had artillery and tanks and helicopters and combat aircraft and overhead imagery. We're fighting goat herders, shepherds. I mean, guys that had rifles, sidearms. They may have had some mortars, and we couldn't beat them. And we had, we had unfettered access. Again, we had control of the air. So now we come up against Iran. Iran, we don't have control of the air. And yes, I am assuming that Iran has now bolstered its air defense systems and significantly upgraded them. And I don't know if it's the case or not, whether there are Chinese and or Russians manning those air defense systems in the process of training the Iranians to use them. But it's a whole different picture. And, if the United States could not prevail in Afghanistan and in the Red Sea against the Houthis, what planet are they living on to imagine that they can attack Iran and not suffer some consequences? And that's, I maintain one of the reasons the United States has been so eager to get into these wars is we've never paid a price. I mean, think about at least, I've used the number 500,000 Iranians died in the Iran-Iraq war. Do you realize Iranians lost more people, if that number is accurate, and it may be higher, Iran lost more people in that war than the United States did in World War II, and we make goddamn movies about that. We build monuments. Oh, look how we suffered. And yet, here's Iran that has, with a smaller population, that suffered far, far more casualties, and casualties that we caused in the United States. We enabled that. We encouraged Saddam to attack. We provided the mustard gas that attacked my friend and brother Mohammad Marandi. And we walk away unscathed. We don't suffer any of the consequences because we don't know the price of what we are inflicting on others. And that's one of the reasons I am so outspoken these days. This has got to stop. It's wrong. But unfortunately, in America, the people embrace it and they celebrate it. They think we're doing what we're doing is right.
Professor Marandi, it seems that Ali Larijani has met with the Houthis as well, the head of Ansarullah movement as well. How would you bring Ansarullah in that scenario of an attack on Iran?
Well, I just want to add to what Larry was saying. The figures are not that high, 500,000, but I actually went with Max Blumenthal to the cemetery in Tehran. We did an hour program together there, the military cemetery, and I told him that basically all these dead soldiers, they are a result of U.S. policy. And whenever the Americans like to complain about Iran, it's just, for me, it's like it's just there's nothing for them to complain about. I mean, using chemical weapons. Larry spoke about mustard gas. I recall the first time that chemical weapons were used against me and my comrades and brothers was during the Khaybar operation, and it was a nerve agent, and I couldn't breathe, and it was like, you're being strangled, and none of us could breathe, and it was a horrific experience. Mustard gas is a different type of horrific experience. If you survive the nerve agent, you survive, but mustard gas, if you survive, that doesn't mean you're going to live for very long, because then it eats away at your internal organs, but in your lungs in particular. And the brother of one of my colleagues, he suffered for decades, and he just died a few years ago after years and years of suffering, and the suffering getting worse and barely being able to breathe, sort of being strangled for decades because that mustard gas ate away at his lung, and people are still dying. But getting back to Ansarullah, I think it's very clear. Ansarullah today is much more prepared for war than it was back then. The United States failed back then, even though it was focused on Ansarullah. Now it cannot focus on Ansarullah. It cannot focus on the resistance in Iraq, and they're hundreds of thousands. All of those people who fought alongside the Iranians to defeat ISIS, who fought under General Soleimani to defeat the extremists that NATO and the Americans and the Israelis and Erdogan and Qatar work together to create. Though they will take out American assets across the board, both in the north of the country, perhaps in Kuwait and elsewhere, and throughout Iraq itself, perhaps in Syria too. We saw an underground missile base in Iraq recently unveiled that belonged to the resistance. That's sending a message. Can the Americans focus on Iraq? No, because they'll be Yemen. And can they focus on these two? No, because the biggest player of all will be Iran. And of course, there's Hezbollah in Lebanon too, and the resistance and elsewhere, and probably nodes of resistance across the region. And imagine if this war happens in Yemen, which is Iraq and Yemen have huge populations. These are not Kuwait. These are not Qatar. They are not the Emirates. These, Bahrain, Emirates, Kuwait, these are tiny regimes, which all of them combined are a couple of million people, 3-4 million people. That's just the size of a city in Iraq or a city in Yemen. So if push comes to shove, you will have multiple fronts and of people who are well trained and well prepared. And at the core of it, you're going to have Iran, which has a massive missile and drone capability, which is going to end the oil and gas trade. So how is the United States ever going to be able to win a war? They can bomb Iran for 3 or 4 days. If those air defenses, regardless of what the air defenses do, and I'm sure that the Iranians have been working on their air defenses, but let's say they're able to bomb Iran for 3 or 4 days. Their economies are going to be taken out. And then these regimes are going to be overthrown. Why would Qatar, which has a population of 300 or so thousand people and millions of foreign workers, when there's no exports and the economy crashes, why should the dictatorship, the ruling family, why should we imagine that it will remain in power? Or in Bahrain, or in the Emirates, or in Kuwait, or any of these entities? They will be swept away most probably. When there's no oil, no gas, what do they have? They have nothing else. These are not real countries. They're not real economies. The foreign population in the Emirates, the foreign population is like 10 million, and the Emiratis are 1,400,000-500,000. The foreigners are mostly male. They're adults. The Emiratis are kids, women. If the regime begins to wobble, why should we even imagine that it will remain intact? So when these regimes fall, the oil market goes through the roof. And of course, during those initial days, another enemy of the United States will be making a lot of money, and that's Russia. But that aside, through their oil exports and gas exports, although I'm pretty sure they'll be giving heavy discounts to China. But no doubt, because of the cooperation they have over Ukraine and the Chinese helping the Russians, there's no doubt that they're going to help the Chinese. But so how is the United States going to manage this? And then ultimately, when this war ends, and it won't last long, people in the United States are going to say, "Why did you destroy our economy? Who destroyed our economy?" And everyone will know it's the Epstein class. It's the Zionists. It's those people who are in the House and in the Senate and in the White House. And what are Americans going to do? Are they going to wait till the midterm elections? Or is it going to be a different America? I think that we're going to see instability in the United States, major instability. It will be a game changer because people will know who brought about this catastrophe, and people across the world will know who brought about this. That's exactly why Iran is negotiating. The Americans put all these conditions, and Iran was steadfast. And it's shameful to say that Turkey and Egypt and Qatar put this disgraceful proposal where Iran gives up its regional allies and gives up its defense capabilities and its nuclear program, like good pawns of the empire. I don't mean the people, I mean the regimes. Iran said no. And Iran said, look, we're only going to negotiate like we did beforehand, like we did in 2015. We're not doing it in Turkey, we're doing it in Oman. The Americans had to accept, and they went there. The Iranians are saying that, look, we're not going to give up our sovereignty, but we're willing to talk. Why? Because Iran wants the world to see that we're not the problem. Iran could say, no, we're not going to negotiate. But I said, no, we will negotiate indirectly in Oman, and and only within this framework. What is the benefit of that? The entire international community recognizes that Iran is willing to talk. Iran is reasonable. Iran expects its sovereignty to be preserved, but is willing to be flexible. But the United States is irrational, unreasonable, influenced deeply by Zionists or the Epstein class, who's going to be blamed after the war? That's going to be very important for Iran. We don't want to be blamed. We don't want to destroy the global economy. We don't want these regimes in the Persian Gulf region to collapse. We don't want to bring about misery for people across the region and across the world. But Iran wants to make sure that the blame is put on the other side, just like the 12-day war. One of the really fascinating things that happened was that the Iranians agreed to indirect negotiations. And the Americans attacked Iran, and the Israeli regime attacked Iran as Iran was negotiating. That benefited Iran enormously, both among Iranians, because Iranians see that their government is trying to solve this problem, and across the world. And so even though the European Union was supporting the aggression, the International Atomic Energy Agency, a tool of the West, was supporting the aggression or justifying it, the US was supporting and helping the aggression, but the world wasn't buying it. So what Iran is doing now is it's saying, look, we're willing to solve this problem. But at the same time, Iran is, just as the US is bringing assets into the region, the Iranians are preparing themselves. Every day, Iran is stronger than the day before. And therefore, Iran is preparing itself, but it's also telling the world that we don't want to fight.